If you put Silent Hill, Stephen King, H.P. Lovecraft, and Twin Peaks all in a blender to see what kind of horror, thriller, mystery concoction was produced, you'd get Alan Wake. Released in 2010, almost every aspect of this game was met with critical acclaim. The tense and spooky atmosphere, the balance between quiet treks through environmental storytelling and intense skirmishes with the horrors of the dark, the soundtrack composed of both licensed works and original pieces, and finally the aspect that stuck with me for the past 13 years since its release.
Yes! Yes! Come to pop!
The story. Remedy Entertainment pulled out all the stops when it came to crafting the world of Alan Wake. The narrative builds on itself with more and more webs of dark lore and mystery as it progresses. The developers are adamant the game isn't solely a horror game, and I'd agree. It's a near-perfect combination of mystery, thriller, and horror all in one experience. So, in celebration of spooky season and the release of Alan Wake 2,
I hope it doesn't suck!
Let's take a trip to the small, unsuspecting town of Bright Falls and explore its dark, twisted secrets. So go ahead, grab yourself a snack, stock up on your product, place Energizer batteries for your flashlight, and whatever you do, keep the lights on. Our story kicks off with a quote from Stephen King about how over-explaining can ruin the fun of a horror story. This quote comes from an article King wrote in Entertainment Weekly back in 2008 called Why Hollywood Can't Do Horror, and apparently King gave Remedy the rights to quote it in the game for only $1. Mr. Krabs would be proud. Our protagonist, Alan Wake, is a writer.
My name is Alan Wake. I'm a writer.
He's the best-selling author of crime fiction novels starring the character Alex Casey, which is basically another version of the protagonist from Remedy's previous games, Max Payne. Alan has been experiencing writer's block for 2 years, unable to release any new works. When we first meet up with him, he's dreaming of a desperate attempt to reach a lighthouse. He can't remember why he needs to go there, only that it's urgent. He's driving way too fast to be attentive, and suddenly,
I'd seen the hitchhiker too late.
Alan laments over the body of the man he'd just run over, worried about going to jail and being separated from his wife when the car's headlights go out. He turns back to the body, only to see that it's disappeared. I'm not entirely sure why he stays out of the car at this point, but I guess he sees the boardwalk and thinks, close enough, I'll hoof it from here. That, and it's a dream, so I guess the logic police can take the night off on this one. Alan's car in this dream is a tan Oldsmobile-looking car, which is apparently an homage to Sam Raimi's use of that car in almost every movie he's made, including Evil Dead, Drag Me to Hell, the Spider-Man trilogy, and Multiverse of Madness. Once Alan reaches the steps, he turns back to see the silhouette of the man he'd just killed standing once again by his car, and in the blink of an eye, he appears right in the player's face.
You don't even recognize me, do you, Ryder?
Alan runs, and the hitchhiker behind him starts talking mad trash.
You think you're God? You think you could just make up stuff?
Apparently the hitchhiker is a character from Alan's novel he's been working on, and he's got a pretty severe case of self-awareness and is pissed at the guy who created him. ChatGPT, please don't take notes. Right off the bat, the player learns the dodge mechanic, which is basically just pick a direction and run. Getting past this encounter, we see the hitchhiker explode into a cyclone of physical darkness and anger, powerful enough to move objects and blast out what few light sources there are. Sprinting across a wooden bridge just before the hitchhiker collapses it, we see a man named Clay Stewart calling out to Alan to come join him in the safety of the cabin.
Clay Stewart, remember? Quickly, get inside!
We don't see Clay again in this game, but the collector's edition of Alan Wake came with the Alan Wake files written by a Clay Stewart that documents his experience where Clay is having nightmares of a man named Alan Wake, and later goes to try and find him after the events of this game. Neat world building and all, but it doesn't make Dream Clay live any longer here.
Damn it, die! No! No! No!
The hitchhiker brings down his axe and finishes Clay, his face possessed by darkness while it stares at Alan through the window. Alan is officially locked inside the cabin, and he sees someone left the TV on overnight, and instead of the George Lopez intro that we all know and love, we get this awful program. We see Chekhov's poster on the back door advertising someone called Tom the Poet. I wonder if that'll come into play later. The entity smashes into the cabin outside, and just before Alan receives the killing blow, a beam of light breaks through the door and its poster, giving Alan a way out. The light is coming from the sky, and a disembodied voice speaks to Alan through it.
You are hurt. You should go into the light. You are only safe there.
This light is actually voiced by James McCaffrey, the voice actor for Max Payne in Remedy's Max Payne series. Speaking in rhymes about darkness of the lake and being to the ports of a deeper, darker ocean green, there's a ton of interpretation for what this means, but I'd be spoiling the story later if I went into it here. That, and it contains some nice references to Remedy's next game, Quantum Break, so that's fun. After hearing these jumbled words of seemingly no meaning, Alan has probably the most relatable response to it.
Do you understand?
No.
The friendly light repairs the stairs and offers to teach Alan how to prepare himself, apparently against a darkness that's coming. Giving Alan both a flashlight and a gun, the player is now taught the core combat mechanic of the game. Enemies that are shrouded in darkness need to be exposed to light to become vulnerable, and once they are, you can take them down. At first I found the lighting effects a little weird, with there being both a broad light and a beam in the middle. I mean, flashlights don't really look like that. But the flashlight serves the purpose of both an actual light with the broad beam to light up dark areas of the game, and then with the small beam, an aiming reticle similar to like what you'd see with the lasers in Resident Evil, so it makes sense. According to the voice, even after the first darkness is burnt away, there's still no saving someone like this from their possession, so they still need to be put down. Is this a moral dilemma avoided, or is the voice in the light just a bloodthirsty warmonger? No clue, don't care, eat lead, idiot. I like that you can tap the reload button for a faster reload with weapons. It's a nice touch that adds some more tension and choice to how you handle combat encounters. Once this is done, the voice tells Alan,
That is all. I will give you back your dream now.
Remembering he still needs to reach the lighthouse for safety, Alan continues on. As the hitchhiker keeps reappearing to attack, we learn that in addition to the flashlight, other light sources can also keep the player safe from the darkness, such as streetlights. As soon as you step into them, you can almost feel the warmth and relief wash over you as a player. Enemies pursuing you will disappear and your health bar will refill. And this flare gun will come in handy too, I'm sure. As Alan nears the lighthouse, the whirlwind of darkness returns, stronger than before. Now it's throwing cars and other large objects at Alan, doing everything it can to keep him from reaching his destination. We finally make it inside, thank God. But like dreams do, this one comes to an abrupt end, or a sudden stop, if you will. That'll make sense later, I promise. The lighthouse loses power, and the darkness Evil Dead's its way in to finally take Alan. With the darkness enveloping his dream, we hear a woman's voice.
He's here.
The dream segment comes to an end at the sound of Alan's wife, Alice's voice. She's woken him up to let him know they've finally arrived at their vacation destination, Bright Falls, and get used to seeing Alan waking up. It happens a lot in this game. The Wakes are traveling here to take a break from their life in New York City, and Alan couldn't be happier to get away from a world that constantly badgers him about when he'll write his next book. Not even playing the remastered version of the game, the arrival to town is still an impressive sight. On the ferry, we meet Pat Main, a local radio host who recognizes Alan right away and asks if he'd come on the radio show. When Alan says no and says he'd rather not let people know he's there, Pat promises to keep it a secret. Alan's overbearing agent, Barry, calls and texts him.
Are the locals giving you trouble? Just say the word and I'll hop on a plane and come make sure that you're left alone, Al.
No, Barry, we're fine.
And Barry makes it clear he hopes Bright Falls will help Alan overcome his writer's block. There's also a camo-clad loner inhaling frat candles at the back of the ferry who's only got this to greet us with.
Let's see who has the last laugh, city boy.
I'm sure that's not foreshadowing anything though. In more ways than I'm going to show you in this video, the town of Bright Falls was heavily inspired by Twin Peaks. Not only that, but the look and feel of it as a living, breathing town is probably in part due to the game originally being planned as an open world adventure. During development though, Remedy made the smart decision to narrow their focus on what would make Alan Wake a unique game: story, characters, combat, atmosphere. The frustrations of trying to implement the open world into what they'd envisioned for Alan Wake led them to ultimately nix the grandiose plans and go with the more linear campaign that was released. However, I don't think they sacrificed making the world feel believable. Just rolling into town, a plane lands in the water and Chekhov's deer float drives by in preparation of the town's annual Deer Fest celebration. Nearly every character you run into has unique dialogue and plays some part in the story, or at the very least appears again later to add to it in some way. This game, to me, proves you don't need a bloated, massive play area with senseless side quests and 1,000 nameless NPCs to achieve player immersion. Good call, Remedy. First order of business, pick up the key to the cabin we're renting from the landlord, Carl Stuckey, a local mechanic. Alan heads to the Oh Dear Diner to meet him, while Alice leaves to go find a better facial animation rendering. If being recognized by the local radio host wasn't enough, the barista in the diner, Rose, immediately fangirls out on Alan, swearing she's his biggest fan and showing off her cardboard cutout of him at the entrance.
I'm looking for...
Mr. Wake. Alan Wake.
We also meet two retired rock stars, Tor and Odin. Their band was aptly named the Old Gods of Asgard.
You need to give it a good solid whack!
Another diner patron, Park Ranger Rusty, informs us that the Anderson brothers are actually escaped patients from a nearby psychiatric clinic who somehow got away, but their doctor is on his way over to pick them up and take them back. Carl Stuckey's apparently had to see a man about a wallaby, so on our way back to the men's room, we see a lady, who definitely doesn't look like the log lady from Twin Peaks, clutching a lamp and peering into the dark hallway, warning us not to go in there.
Don't go in there, young man. You can hurt yourself in the dark.
She says she warned Carl not to go into the dark, but he didn't listen, and now he hasn't come back out. Look, lady, Alan's here to make love to his wife in an Airbnb and chew bubblegum, and he's all out of bubblegum. So our boy walks right past her to harass the landlord for the key. Alan knocks on the bathroom door to no answer. Instead, out of the darkness, a woman in black appears beside him.
Carl couldn't make it. Unfortunately, he was taken ill. But I have the key for you and instructions on how to get to the lake.
A little confused since he was told Carl was the landlord, Alan still accepts. The lady in black hands over the key and promises to stop by later to check on the couple.
I insist.
And most certainly interrupt their night of romantic escapades. Alan reunites with Alice back outside, where she reveals she did not find a better facial rendering, but she did pick up some flashlights just in case they're in a video game that requires them for its combat mechanics. Setting off with their cabin key and directions, the Wakes are in too much of a hurry to get their 50 Shades on to notice Carl Stuckey stumble out of the diner behind them, holding his head as though he'd just woken up and yelling,
"Hey, wait! Mrs. Wake! Your keys!"
If those are our keys, whose cabin are we headed to? The Wakes arrive at Diver's Isle to settle into their cabin. As the sun starts to set, Alan reveals through narration that Alice has an intense fear of the dark, hence her side quest earlier to go get some flashlights. As we walk up, we get our first look at Chekhov's birds, inspired by Hitchcock's 1963 horror film, The Birds. Okay, I know I've referenced Chekhov's gun like 3 times already, but for anyone that may not be familiar with it, Chekhov's gun is a narrative principle that basically states, don't waste the audience's time. If your story mentions a boomstick hanging on a wall, it needs to be because it gets used later. If your cop character mentions they have a grandma in the hospital, they need to turn corrupt to try and save their grandma when the Joker threatens to destroy hospitals. This game is chock full of foreshadowing, and things that seem irrelevant at first almost always come into play in a more important way later. I'll stop using the Chekhov reference, but just know the writers of this game made dang sure to include things that foreshadow or serve a later purpose all over the place. This makes subsequent playthroughs that much more enjoyable in my opinion. With an oddly placed QuickTime event, we use the woman in black's keys to open the cabin door. The power's out.
It's dark in there. We need lights.
Alice, with her fear of the dark, immediately goes into big baby sad mode. If you look around the cabin, you find a photograph of the dock outside with someone in a diver's suit standing on it and a box of books written by someone named Thomas Zane. On the way to turn on the generator, Alan spots a carving of 2 initials inside of a heart on a tree stump and says,
"The island had once been the site for a love story. Maybe it would be that again."
That's right, Alan. With that attitude, anything is possible.
The power cable goes to that shed over there.
Alright, not off to a great start, but the night is young. The sun begins to set. Switching the radio on will grant you to listen to Pat's radio show, where he mentions he ran into a celebrity on the ferry, but won't specify who, which is immediately followed up by
Caller, you're on KBF-FM.
Hi, Pat. It's Rose.
Why, hello, Rose. What's on your mind?
I know who that famous artist was. It was Alan Wake, wasn't it? He's my favorite writer.
Alice calls to Alan from the upstairs bedroom, saying she has a surprise for him. This is it, boys. The hours of driving, paying the cabin's rent, paying the cleaning fees, they're all about to pay off. Go get her, Alan.
Finally!
Well, hello there.
I'm not the surprise. It's in the study. Go take a look.
Alan walks into the other room with a fresh set of blue balls to find Alice has brought him a typewriter.
Surprise!
Alice?
What is this?
She was hoping he'd start writing again while they were there. Furious, Alan can't believe she's doing this to him on their vacation. Alice mentions she read a book by a psychologist who specializes in helping artists and his clinic is nearby. They could pay him a visit. Her reason for suggesting they vacation in Bright Falls has become clear. The power starts to short.
Take that. That's not... Alan? Alan?
And the woman in black's face appears in the shadows. Enraged and betrayed, Alan ignores Alice's concerns over the lights going out and storms out of the cabin. While outside, the power finally gives out completely, and Alice screams.
Alice! Alice!
Alan races back to the cabin, but is attacked by flocks of birds on the way. He's got a pretty realistic reaction to this too. The flashlight seems to keep them at bay. Alice's screams start to sound less like someone afraid of the dark and more like someone being attacked.
No! Alice? Alice?
Frantic, Alan searches for her, only to find the outside railing broken. Peering down into the dark water, he sees what appears to be Alice sinking to the depths of the lake. Alan, being a much better man than me after the stunt she pulled, dives into the water after her without hesitation. The screen goes black. An unspecified amount of time passes, and we see Alan waking up behind the wheel of his crashed car with a wound to his head. In the back of the car is the book The Creator's Dilemma by Dr. Emil Hartman, the psychologist Alice had wanted Alan to see. With no clue how he got there or where he is, Alan can see the lights of a nearby gas station and decides to head towards it. On the way, a bright flashing light briefly appears, and pieces of paper with writing on them land on the ground. Upon inspection of these pieces of paper, they're manuscript pages for a book called Departure, with Alan Wake named as the author. Alan has zero memory of ever writing these pages or this story, but he knows that's what he wanted to name his next book. So begins a very cool feature of this game, the collection of manuscript pages. Throughout the game, Alan will find these collectible pages and be able to read them. They're basically what you'd likely read if this entire game were a novel. They provide foreshadowing of events to come and descriptions of events Alan is not present for in order to add backstory and characterization. In this video, I'll read some, summarize some, and include some information that you got from them just in my summary, but just know if you play this game, it's well worth finding them all to see the full picture of the game's narrative. Our first manuscript page describes Alan encountering someone with a bloody axe, which hasn't happened yet. Alan has to pass through the lumber yard to get to the gas station. Upon arrival, he sees the landlord, Carl Stuckey, pulling an axe out of a corpse and looking just like the possessed hitchhiker from his dream.
Carl Stuckey, pleased to meet you.
Carl Stuckey chases Alan into a nearby shed and gives us a nice Shining reference as he slams the axe into the door. Alan finds a revolver. One thing I'll say about the dialogue from the possessed in this game is that if you're just listening, it's creepy as all get out. But if you play with subtitles on like I do, it kind of makes it silly. But I get it. It's jumbled sentences or thoughts from that person's brain that are making their way out, so it makes sense why they're saying what they are.
During your trying walking.
Better than them just all repeating the same line of dialogue every time you run into one.
Circus in town? Circus in town? Circus in town?
Alan tries to call the police, but the power lines are knocked over. Narrowly dodging being pushed over the cliff by a tractor, Alan is forced to fight off members of the lumberyard workers who also have what appears to be darkness spilling from them like ink and water. Alan is able to defeat them with the same 1-2 combo that he learned in his dream. First light, then lead. While here, Alan discovers yellow paint that only shows in the light, leading to caches of supplies like ammo, energizer batteries, and flares. These were clearly left behind by someone who wanted them to be found and used. Whoever left them refers to the people possessed as taken. A very cool detail that I didn't notice until my second playthrough is the sound of an almost muffled breathing that you hear when you're near these caches. We'll mention what that is later. Over the river, through the woods, to the gas station Alan goes, finding a manuscript page along the way that mentions Barry's calls and texts to the Wakes had gone unanswered for several days, and that he booked a flight to Bright Falls to come find them. This is our first clue as the player of how much time has passed since Alice went missing. Are these pages predicting the future, or did they write the future? Either way, they seem to hold answers to what is to come, so Alan's gonna keep collecting them. It's here that we encounter a second enemy type. In appearance, it's another taken person, but they're much faster faster. They're tougher to keep in your beam of light, but take less light and less shots to bring down. Moving into the final stretch of this lumberyard, a TV set comes on and introduces us to yet another type of collectible Remedy put extra effort into. This time, they're full episodes of a fictional TV show called Night Springs, a clear riff on the Twilight Zone. They're about 3 to 4 minutes each, and it's truly impressive how above and beyond Remedy went in their references, even just in their collectibles that you find. Stucky, who's been stalking us this whole time, finally reveals himself for a fight. He's extremely fast, but once you're finally able to hit him with enough light, he's no match for your newly acquired shotgun. Finally free to proceed to the gas station, a manuscript page gives Stucky's point of view just before Alan had arrived at the lumberyard. All he knew was that the Wakes hadn't met with him to get his cabin keys, and his head had hurt ever since the diner. Something attacked him in his garage, causing him to spill black oil onto the floor as darkness engulfed him. I mean, really, poor guy. One minute he's stood up by some renters, and the next he's getting assaulted. At the gas station, we see the deer float from the beginning once more, and a sign that says Deerfest is 1 week away. Deerfest had been 2 weeks away when Alan and Alice had arrived in Bright Falls, meaning it had likely been a week since Alan had jumped into the lake after Alice, and he could remember none of it. Once inside, we see the spilled oil that had been mentioned in the manuscript and the aftermath of a struggle. In the shop, a TV turns on by itself, and we see Alan in front of what appears to be the typewriter Alice brought, and rambling to himself about needing to keep writing in order to save her.
Just now, I could smell her perfume in the room. I'll reach her. I'll fix it up. I'll bring her back. The story will come true. If I stop, she's lost. I don't believe this. It'd been me on the TV, talking crazy. Was I losing my mind?
Alan uses the phone in the gas station to call the police, and Sheriff Sarah Breaker shows up to answer. Like a psycho, Alan immediately starts yelling about his wife being missing since they got to their cabin on Cauldron Lake, but the sheriff responds,
"There's no island on Cauldron Lake, not since the big eruption in the 70s.
She notices the wound on his head and asks if he's thinking straight, so Alan agrees to go with her to the police station if he can show her the cabin they were staying at first. She agrees, and they drive to the lake. The sheriff had been telling the truth. There is no cabin on Cauldron Lake. This game takes breaks between chapters to imitate episodes of a TV show, complete with an outro song, recap. Not only is it a cool nod to the TV shows that inspired Alan Wake, it's also a nice way to help the player keep track of the events so far, and adds a lot to the game's overall pacing between all the being chased around in the dark and plot developments. Chapter 2 begins with a flashback to the Wake's New York City apartment. Alice is working on some cover photos for the next book, and Alan is making some coffee. If you look around the apartment, you'll find some of Alan's previous books on a shelf, and if you weren't convinced his novel's character of Alex Casey is intended to be a reference to Max Payne, right next to the books are Max Payne's signature Berettas in a case, but gold because I guess Alan finished all the camo challenges. There's also some manuscript pages here from Alan's book, The Sudden Stop. Instead of these being narrated by Alan's voice actor, Matthew Peretta, these are read by Max Payne's voice actor, James McCaffrey.
It's true what they say about the fall and the sudden stop at the end.
Remedy's proud of their games, and they certainly do like to show it through their Easter eggs. Cool stuff. The snowstorm outside causes the power to go out, so Alan and Alice take their flashlights and candles to the couch. The blackout has cemented its place as the ultimate wingman. Alice apologizes for her fear of the dark and says it's just something she can't control. To console her, Alan tells her a story of when he was young. His mom gave him an old broken light switch she called the clicker. Little Alan believed if he just hit the switch, it would light up and make all the monsters in the dark go away. And with one reveal that he's still got that clicker from his childhood, Alan has achieved ultimate Riz. Back to the present day, Alan's concussion and head wound are being checked up on by Bright Springs doctor, Dr. Nelson. Now that it's a valid question as to whether or not everything Alan saw the previous night was even real, Alan's trying not to be thrown in a padded cell, so he decides to keep everything to himself for now. A small but nice touch is when Dr. Nelson says,
"Sarah, Sheriff Breaker is waiting for you."
Correcting himself to maintain professionalism just helps re-emphasize that Bright Falls is a small town, and in this community everyone knows everyone. In the lobby of the sheriff's department, Alan comes across the lamp lady from the diner, her name now being revealed as a Miss Weaver.
Thank you for testing the lights, Miss Weaver. Everything seems to be fine.
I don't have the luxury of being complacent, Deputy Grant. The bulbs will need changing soon. You can't change them in the dark.
Alan also passes by some missing posters of a few local hunters. Sheriff Breaker gives Alan his now fully charged cell phone and asks him about the night's events. Understandably, Alan impatiently just asks her what they're doing to find Alice, and the sheriff reassures him her people are on it. While still in her office, Alan gets a call from an unknown number. And whose voice do we hear?
Alan, please help me.
Alice?
Stop talking to the law. You'll do exactly what I say if you ever want to see your wife again.
It's a man who says he's kidnapped Alice, and to prove he means business, he's left something for Alan to find behind the station. He demands Alan meet him in a spot in the national park called Lover's Peak. I mean, there's easier ways to ask someone on a date, but I admire his tenacity, I guess. On the way outside, Alan runs into a guy named Walt who's been locked in one of the cells. He begs Alan to turn the lights on, to which the player can just ignore him or grant his request. If you turn the lights on for him, Walt will explain that he's locked in there because he gave his friend Danny the 1-2 fisticuffs in a drunken episode the night before. Either way though, the guy ends up back in a boo snooze by the next time you see him. Behind the police station and in the seat of a broken down truck, Alan finds Alice's driver's license. This convinces Alan that the man on the phone is telling the truth. He really did kidnap Alice. A nearby manuscript page lets us know that Alan will eventually meet this kidnapper face to face. It's still reasonable to ask though, are these pages telling the truth, or is this just the dark fantasy that Alan has written and is now treating as fact? Barry, Alan's agent, calls.
Barry?
Ow! Ow! Thank God! Where the hell have you been? I've been trying to reach you for a week, you and Alice. I've been worried sick. I flew out yesterday. I'm here in Bright Falls.
Alan heads past the cells once more, the TV cutting on to show Alan again typing at his typewriter and talking to himself about how stories are crafted from nothing.
If I stop, the world I'm making dies. Darkness will reclaim it.
Whatever that means. On his way to the front exit, Alan runs into Dr. Emil Hartman, the psychiatrist who convinced Alice to bring Alan to Bright Falls in the first place, so that he might check into his clinic. Alan decks him right in front of the sheriff. Sure, being locked up for saying you defended yourself from possessed people the night before is bad, but being locked up for assault in broad daylight, that is A-okay. Amidst the scuffle, we finally get our first proper introduction to the true protagonist of this story.
Nobody move! Get your hands off of my client! Who are you? I'm Barry Wheeler, his agent.
That was a joke, not a spoiler, I promise. He's actually a big point of comic relief in this game. Barry sticks out like a fish out of water in his red puffer jacket and floral shirt, but make no mistake, he means business. Dr. Hartman plays his bigger man card and says he doesn't want to press charges, and extends an invite to Alan to stay at his lodge. Sus. Alan and Barry leave to go rent a cabin in the national park instead, putting them right in the vicinity of Lover's Peak, where the kidnapper wants to meet with Alan. First, we have to pick up a key to our newly rented cabin from Rusty, the park ranger that we met in the diner earlier. It's here that the game reminds us that Rose is a character by having Alan and Barry run into her just after she's delivered some coffee.
Oh, I was just thinking about you too.
And we get to see Barry's Riz face. No need to imagine what it looked like on your own anymore, I guess.
Hi, Rose.
A small but appreciated detail that you wouldn't know if you didn't find the manuscript page, Rusty actually has a crush on Rose. That's why he spends so much time at the diner and asks her to cater coffee to him. A detail I find hilarious in this next part is that while Alan and Barry are arguing in the main lodge about the legitimacy of Alan's claims about the night before, every time you walk out of the room to go speak to Rusty, Alan basically just tells Barry to shut up. And when you return, the conversation picks right back up again.
The last time you slept. Are you high?
Wait here.
Yeah, I'd rather not leave him alone.
Have you been drinking?
No!
Eat a kidnapper? Those situations always end
Wait
up in
here.
disaster. You gotta talk to the cops.
She's my wife, and it's my call.
Barry does not believe Alan, but he's extremely interested in hearing that his client has finally written something after 2 years of writer's block. Outside, Rusty is tending to a hurt good boy and warns us about someone in the park setting illegal bear traps in the area, and gives Alan a key to one of the cabins for the night, along with directions on how to get to Lover's Peak.
Just follow the paths, you'll get to it eventually. It's an easy walk. Nice spot, too.
Rusty also mentions there are a lot of campers staying in the park that they have not heard from in some time. I'm sure they're fine, Rusty. I'm sure they're fine. At their newly rented cabin, Alan tells Barry if he's not back by morning, call the police. Barry tries to get Alan to bring in the police or the FBI now, but Alan insists going alone is the only way to keep the kidnapper from hurting Alice. In this next segment, the game does a great job of building tension through environmental storytelling and a couple of minor jump scares from here. Remembering what Rusty said about campers going missing in the back of your mind, you can move from cabin to cabin looking for some sweet, delicious loot, but if you stop and smell the roses, you notice some things that are out of place. The first cabin appears to all be in order, but if you happen to glance over at one of the windows, you see
What's your Deerfest plan like?
There's no music blare to add to the figure you just saw walk by the window. You just saw it. I actually missed this on my first couple of playthroughs, and on my third, I only caught it out of the corner of my eye. One thing that I've barely mentioned so far is yet another collectible type, and that's snippets of Pat Main's radio show. If you turn on a radio and listen, you get to hear different residents of Bright Falls call in. Sometimes they're sort of just complimentary characterizations, like with Rose outing Alan Wake's arrival, or Dr. Nelson's love of fishing, and other times they give you more insight into how the normal folk of Bright Springs are responding to the weird stuff happening. Like when you hear about pets going missing, or people complaining about the gunshots they're hearing at nighttime. It's pretty great for world building, and yet another way Remedy made their collectible hunting in this game worth the time to find them. The next cabin has its windows smashed in, and the sound of crows echo nearby. Furniture out of place and blood on the floor, it's clear whoever was staying here got an unwelcome visit from the Stork Squad. We need to stop by the Visitor Center on our way to Lover's Peak first, and on the way there, a manuscript page tells the player what we're going to find. Apparently, we're going to see Rusty wounded and telling Alan it happened just like it did on that page. Unless Alan is hallucinating all of this, this confirms for the player that other characters can both see and read the manuscript pages too. I wonder what kind of reactions different characters will have to knowing the future can be written down before it happens. Closing in on the Visitor Center, Alan gets a vision. If that weren't creepy enough, here's what we're greeted by when we enter the Visitor Center.
Rusty, hang on! I'm coming! Please, help me!
Something is knocking over trees and demolishing buildings. Something powerful. Inside, we find Rusty, and it plays out just like on the page. He's wounded. Max the good boy is whining in his cage.
Oh, hell. It happened just the way it was on that page.
Rusty begs us to get the lights back on and gives Alan the key to the office. Arriving at the breaker box, we discover someone slammed an axe straight through it, ensuring the power will stay off. It was a diversion. It's here that we come across a sort of enemy type. I think it's more like an environmental hazard, but it's splotches of pure darkness that damage you if you touch them. They look like puddles of black goo, almost, and can be easily defeated just by shining your light on them long enough, no ammo needed. Defeating some taken hunters, presumably the ones Rusty had mentioned were missing, we see the back wall has been smashed through and Max the dog is dead? I'd take it all back, this game sucks, 0 out of 10.
Park Ranger's instructions
At all times. Rusty? Rusty, no!
He's not only able to walk now, but he can run. Similar to Stucky's Taken form, he's fast and takes more damage than your average Taken. If one good thing comes from this attack on the Visitor Center, it's that Barry saw it from the cabin.
I saw it from the window. I saw something.
Forget about it, Barry. It's just me going crazy.
Oh, jeez. Oh, jeez. You're not crazy. I wish you were crazy. But you're not crazy!
Although this is sort of a funny moment, it's also nice to feel like we're getting some real confirmation that what Alan is seeing, other people are seeing too. It's now that the Dark Presence throws at us different campers and hunters who have been taken in the dark. A manuscript page clues us in that an FBI agent named Nightingale is going to show up looking for Alan at some point. As we cross a chasm in a pulley lift, a swarm of taken birds attack. Just as he's about to be overcome by a group of taken. It's the camo-clad guy from the ferry. He tells Wake to hurry up and hands him some flares, giving the player a new way to use light against the Taken. Unlike the flare gun, flares can be held or dropped, and they slowly shave away the Taken's darkness without having to use your flashlight. It's a good way to create some space when the Taken are getting in too close.
You can see them too?
Hell, of course I see them. Come on, we gotta move.
Why?
Because that's the way the story goes.
Yeah, but...
Let's move!
Well, that's a relief. Maybe this isn't one of those it was all a dream kind of stories after all. God, I hope not. Those are truly the bane of my existence. Alan lost his weapons, but this guy's got one. Alan immediately deduces this guy must know who Alan is. have either read or be aware of the manuscript pages.
There was no way this was a coincidence. He was the kidnapper.
He refuses to hand over his revolver, so we spend the next segment protecting him with our flashlight and flares while he finishes off the Taken enemies that appear. And we're not just seeing average-sized people anymore, now we're seeing larger Taken called Assault Taken that are the opposite of the quick ones. They move slower, but they take and receive more damage. Easy to hit with light and bullets, but even when you're shining your flashlight straight at them, they'll keep moving closer to you until you're at arm's length. After a standoff with a few swarms of Taken, the man reveals he is the kidnapper that we're here to meet.
You're gonna bring about something glorious and terrible once we get you some proper editorial control.
What the hell are you talking about? Where's Alice?
I want the entire manuscript, or she's gonna suffer bad.
Knuckles Magoo does what he does best and they both topple off the side, the kidnapper escaping in the process. At this point in the game, we start to see the darkness build up with more intensity and more often. Almost like a Silent Hill-esque fog that builds up as though the darkness itself is moving around you in a storm. When you see this, it indicates the dark presence is nearby, and there are Taken that are likely waiting to ambush you. The sound design is excellent too, building in intensity until an attack happens. If you defeat them all, the fog of darkness goes away and normal visibility returns. I do have a small gripe that the game likes to announce when an enemy has entered the area. It kind of removes any possibility of a jump scare or being startled. There are plenty of times when it doesn't announce it, people just pop out, but the horror buff in me would have preferred they just let things jump out at you without giving you a, hey, we're over here, we're coming to get you.
Be aware of Widowmakers.
Then again, this was 2010 when game studios were losing faith in the marketability of single-player horror games, and all of our favorite horror franchises started shifting over to more action-y games, like Resident Evil 5 or Dead Space 3. So I understand why they didn't go all in on horror in this game, but hey, apparently Alan Wake 2 is going to be full-on survival horror, so I'm here for it. After finding a page that says,
"That's when I heard the chainsaw,"
there's a couple of other great moments in this trip, like running from a group of Taken to a street light across a bridge, only for the light to go out right when you get there, or the game baiting you into turning on a generator, and then a fight with that earlier promised chainsaw-wielding big boy. He's a monster of a bullet sponge already on his own, but to add insult to injury, he brings with him his own posse of weaker Taken, and you can't take down his darkness just by shining your flashlight. You have to use your batteries and boost ability. Moving through a mill, we learn that the police are already investigating the disappearance of all the lumberyard workers from the night before, and we get a heads up that the birds are going to attack Barry while he's still hiding in the cabin. This highlights another great detail about this game that Remedy didn't have to include, but did anyway. You see and fight a lot of Taken people in this game, meaning a lot of people in the area get possessed by the dark presence and are presumably never seen again. Well, this would logically beg the question, in such a small town, wouldn't the dark presence run out of people to possess? And how do people not notice the disappearances en masse? Well, as you'll see, every night in this game gives you a logical group of people that the dark presence would take over to try and stop you, and solid implications for whether or not it's been noticed by anyone else. This pattern continues throughout the game, and I love that Remedy took the time to think through who was going to be coming after you, rather than just throwing in the same 3 character models with no explanation for the entire game. In line with the page we found, Barry calls and says,
"Ow! The porch is covered with birds. They've got all Hitchcock on me."
"Stay out of sight. I'm on my way. Don't open the door."
Alan's gonna have to get a truck if he's gonna make it to Barry on time. While getting the keys from the campground parking area, Alan sees himself on another TV screen, this time talking about how
a story is a beast with a life of its own. You can create it, shape it, but as the story grows, it starts wanting things of its own. Change one thing and you set off a chain reaction of events that spreads through the whole thing. The characters have to be true to themselves. The events need to follow a logic that fits the story. A single flaw and the magic is gone. The story dies. Alice dies.
This is actually pretty important. It shows that Cauldron Lake demands the story has to follow its own logic and the characters have to be true to themselves. Alan as a writer can't just write whatever he wants just to hurry up and get to a specific end goal. Maybe the last season of Game of Thrones should have been written at Cauldron Lake. Anywho, Alan gets the truck and takes off back toward the rented cabin. I wasn't ever expecting driving sequences in this game, but it's cool that they're here. It gives Bright Falls more sense of scope and adds some nice variety to the gameplay. You can use your headlights to burn the take-in that try to block your way, and after that, a well-timed front bumper will send them flying into oblivion. The kidnapper calls once more.
Listen. I'm gonna need time to finish it. I still need to write the ending. I need a week.
It's not done?
I need a week.
2 days! The old Bright Falls coal mine is nearby. You can find it easy, city boy. The main building, there at noon. You bring the manuscript, you'll get your wife. If not, well, get me.
We arrive at the cabin and see that Barry's fears were well-founded. Hundreds of birds are flying around, and the player is forced to use flares, the flare gun, and the flashlight to drive off multiple flocks of them. A lot of times you kinda just find yourself doing circles looking for the next flock to try and jump you, but more often than not, their arrival is signaled by the sudden cause of the flock, to which you'll only have about a second to turn the correct way and drive them off with your light before taking damage. The birds defeated, Alan and Barry reunite in the cabin.
Hey, Al. I'm sorry for thinking you were having a psychotic episode, man.
The next morning, Barry heads into town to try and figure out the identity of the kidnapper, while Alan stays at the cabin to try and write an ending to the manuscript. The writer's block is still in full effect, however, so he's not able to write a single word. While Alan laments that not even supernatural threats can get him past his writer's block, Barry gets a call from Rose the barista.
This is Rose.
Rose?
I found Mr. Wake's pages.
Oh, you sweet, brilliant girl.
Could you and Mr. Wake come get them? I live in the trailer park outside the town.
We'll be there in less than an hour.
Bye now.
See you soon.
Have a great day. Hope you come back soon. Welcome to the Oh Dear Diner.
Good girl.
Rose, frozen in a blank smile, is now under the influence of the darkness and has just laid a trap for Alan Wake. When we arrive to the trailer park that Rose lives in at the beginning of Chapter 3, we get sort of an exposition dump from Barry now that he's back from talking to some townspeople. I'll summarize it as best I can, but bear with me here. There are a lot of local legends about Cauldron Lake that involve disappearances and other spooky stuff. While the lake is technically the opening of a dormant volcano, the Native Americans in the area believe it is a door to another world of unimaginable horrors. Back in the 1970s, a local poet named Thomas Zane, wink wink, used to dive there all the time from the dock at his cabin, so they started calling the spot around it Diver's Isle. The story goes that his lover, Barbara Jagger, was his muse, his primary inspiration for the poems he would write. Hence the carving of the initials TZ and BJ on the tree stump we saw in Chapter 1 behind the cabin. One day, Barbara drowned in the lake during a swim, and her body was never recovered. This was odd though, because Barbara, who was 25 at the time, was known to be a good swimmer. A week later, the volcano under the lake erupted, causing Thomas's cabin and Diver's Isle to sink and flood some nearby mining tunnels. Tom was never seen again, and presumed to have died in the eruption. Now the locals tell stories of the scratching hag, Barbara Jagger, now appearing as an old lady in black funeral garb that haunts the woods and scares children in the dark. Oddly enough, although the locals think of Tom as a famous poet, there's not any record of his works or disappearance in Bright Falls anywhere, except for some articles written by a Cynthia Weaver. Miss Weaver is now known as the Lamp Lady, cautioning everyone in town to keep the lights on at all times. Maybe she's onto something. Sheriff Breaker calls Alan and tells him there's an FBI agent named Nightingale at the station who wants to speak with him. He tells her he'll hurry over as soon as he can. The landlord of the trailer park leads Alan and Barry to Rose's cabin, where she answers the door.
Welcome to... Oh dear, Mr. Wake. I'm so glad you're here.
Rose, you have my manuscript?
Oh yes. Yes. Please, come in.
She offers them some coffee and they oblige. When Alan asks for the manuscript pages that she told them she had, Barry and Alan pass out.
Hey, Al? Al, what's... Oh...
Barry!
Rose has apparently spiked their coffee with some of the good stuff, and as Alan fades from consciousness, Rose smiles on. Alan enters a dreamlike state surrounded by darkness, again taking the appearance of black ink and water. The bright light from his dream returns and speaks.
It's coming for you, hiding in my barber's skin. I'm too weak to stop it. You must turn the lights on.
This is the voice of Thomas Zane. Right on cue, the dark presence appears in the likeness of Barbara Jagger and tells Alan,
"You must finish what you started."
Alan wakes up.
Back to work, boy.
Rising from Rose's bed, we see she wasn't kidding. She really is an Alan Wake superfan. The television comes on and we see Alan. If it wasn't clear before, it is now. This is footage from the week he doesn't remember. Alan says he's trying to write, but the woman, Barbara Jagger, is acting as his editor, forcing him to revise more and more of what he writes. She's promised him he can write Alice back and save her, but only if he writes by her rules. Alan has agreed to go along with it because she seems to know more about what's going on at this lake than he does, plus she said she's done this before with a writer named Thomas Zane. However, the story is shifting. It's becoming a horror story. On the way out, Alan passes by the still unconscious Barry, and Rose, who's still in a catatonic state, rocking herself on the floor.
You're right. I deserve more money. I'm so handsome.
Welcome to the Oh Dear Diner. What can I get you today? Coffee?
Alan's been unconscious for a whole day and now only has 12 hours until the next meeting with Alice's kidnapper. On the way to get the car, Alan hears Walt, the drunk guy from the jail cell earlier, call into Pat Main's radio show to say that his friend, Danny, has been missing ever since they got into that fight. As we get to the parking lot, we see red and blue lights. The landlord has called the police. I can't say I blame him. I mean, two strange men going into a young girl's trailer and no one comes out for hours and no one would answer the door? I mean, he's definitely not the bad guy here. Okay, so I'm a big fan of the believability and uniqueness to the characters in this game, but we're about to meet an exception. FBI agent Nightingale, an absolutely cartoonish, over-the-top caricature of a bloodthirsty bad cop, rolls up and immediately starts taking shots at Alan with zero regard to the civilian standing right in front of him. Thankfully, the other characters do call him out on this nonsense.
I'm standing right here, you maniac!
Yeah, I know, we get some backstory via manuscript that he's most likely drunk every time we encounter him, so that does explain his behavior a bit, but his trigger-happy nature and incessant use of famous authors' names whenever he's talking to Alan is a little too obnoxious to fit well into this game, in my opinion.
This is Agent Nightingale, FBI! Get him up, Hemingway! You're under arrest! You move a muscle, I'll unload right in your face! Stay right where you are, Slade!
When the sheriff asks why the FBI is even after Alan Wake, his only answer is federal business. Look, I hated when Halo 5 expected players to read other material, and I hate that it's done here, but we are able to understand more about Agent Nightingale if we look at the Alan Wake files, the companion writing that came with the collector's edition of the game. Apparently he was a no-nonsense, by-the-books agent with his partner Agent Finn. At some point in time, Agent Finn became taken by the Dark Presence when they passed through Bright Falls, and Nightingale came across some of Alan's manuscript pages. He's not actually operating under FBI jurisdiction here at all. He's just hell-bent on revenge for his partner, and believes he can stop the story by unfolding if he can keep Alan from writing any more pages. I do like that this game gives us a lot of different types of reactions to people learning about Alan's pages, but Nightingale is the only one whose motives aren't ever actually explained in-game that I'm aware of. So that is one gripe I have, especially considering how prominent of an antagonist he is. Apparently an original plan for the game was to have the players switch between Alan and Agent Nightingale, but that got scrapped. It looks like the idea of playing as an FBI agent is being borrowed for Alan Wake 2 though. Anyway, let's continue to an admittedly cool chase sequence. The police, under Nightingale's command, are after Alan. We're forced to sprint through the woods, dodging gunfire and flashlight beams wherever we can. But if one force chasing us isn't enough, trees start to crackle. Sheriff Breaker can be heard over the squad car radio screaming at Nightingale for being reckless and almost shooting the trailer park landlord. Good. A very ominous scene unfolds beneath Alan while he's on a path. The police are shooting up flares for visibility, and you can see their flashlights moving between all the foliage. The darkness roars, and some of the officers start to scream. Next, you can tell the rest of them are being attacked by familiar faces when one of them says, you see their flashlights go out. Can you guess who our next batch of Taken to fight tonight is going to be? Over another squad car radio, Breaker's calling out for the squad she lent to Nightingale, but receives no answer.
Wait, are you seriously telling me that geek writer just took out my deputies? Are you kidding? I mean, have you seen this guy? He wears a tweed jacket. Over.
Ouch. A police chopper starts taking shots at Alan, but is put out of commission by a flock of taken birds, crashing into some nearby trees and exploding on impact. In a sightseeing tower, Alan overhears that Rose and Barry have been detained, and sees Pat Main's radio show building nearby. Since Alan doesn't have anyone left to call, he figures he can try asking Pat how to get to the coal mines for his second meeting with the kidnapper. We now come upon a new enemy type, taken objects. As ridiculous and non-threatening as it sounds, these things unironically can be the most difficult enemies in the game. This one might just be a non-moving gate that acts as a barrier until we burn it with light, but you'll see what I mean later. Alan works his way through some taken officers, who are now spouting off lines like, Side note, some of these taken police officers are huge. No wonder Bright Falls never had to worry about crime. I mean, imagine that monster of a human chasing you down for jaywalking. We find some handy-dandy flashbang grenades in another wrecked squad car. I appreciate this game thought of as many ways to use light as a weapon as it could. At this point, we now have our flashlight, flares, flare gun, flashbangs, streetlights, generators, and headlights when we're driving, and occasionally place spotlights.
What's on your mind, Mill?
Well, I live near the trailer park, Pat, and there's a big ruckus going on over there.
Alan makes it to the radio station, and we interrupt Pat's broadcast.
Oh, here's a little surprise. The famous writer Alan Wake just walked in.
At absolute light speed, Nightingale and the Goof Troop show up at the station for another round of let's shoot near the civilians.
Nowhere to run down, Dan Brown.
Pat Main and Sheriff Breaker try to calm the situation, but neither of them got the memo that Nightingale is an insufferably written character, so he fires off some rounds anyway. Alan never gets the chance to ask Pat how to get to the coal mines. Moving to find the coal mines on his own, Alan notices a lot of strategically placed trucks whose beds are full of ammunition and spotlights. He deduces that someone must be leaving these around the woods on purpose, just like someone is leaving the light caches around. Someone who knows about the dark presence and how to fight them. Approaching the rail yard, Alan gets a call.
Hello?
The most stubborn man I've ever met.
Alice? Alice?
Alan. I'm so afraid. Keeps me in the dark. Please help me.
Her sentences are broken. She pleads with Alan to be careful and cooperate, and the line goes dead. Even the nighttime levels of mostly linear paths start to feel very huge in scale from this point onward. Again, it's not an open world game, but it almost feels like one with how far the landscape goes and how big some explorable areas are. Moving across the underside of the railway bridge, we get to see what happens when the darkness takes something that isn't living, or a gate. Objects can be taken, rising up with life of their own and launching themselves toward the player at high speeds. These things can be the difference between a no-death playthrough and dying 7 times at the same encounter, without exaggeration. Against just one, it's easy enough to dodge, and depending on which stage you're in, you might even be able to cheese it if you hide behind something thin. But if you're semi-low on batteries, or multiple of these things are hurling themselves at you while you're fighting off other enemies, it really can be challenging. Which is a good thing. Resource management isn't all too difficult in this game, so I'm glad Remedy added some variety to the combat scenarios to give the player more of a challenge. On the way to grab a truck, we have a boss encounter with a taken tractor. Sounds ridiculous, I know, but this thing acts like a bull, charging at you and doing a lot of damage if it makes contact. On top of that, just like the chainsaw guy, you can't just shine your light, you have to boost your light, or use other means like flares. Once it's defeated, you get behind the wheel of a vehicle, the sun starts to come up. The slower paced driving segments like this really make it feel like an open world. You can drive along the path to the destination or stop at landmarks to see if there's any goodies there. And in this game, there usually are. At this point, Alan knows he's not going to finish the manuscript, so he's planning on just holding the kidnapper at gunpoint and trying to force him to give up Alice. If you come across a radio in this section, Pat Main actually apologizes on air.
And if someone I met last night is listening, let me just say, I'm sorry if my mouth got you in trouble. I'm pretty sure you're not the bad guy here. Godspeed, son. I hope you know what you're doing.
It's almost noon. Time to meet the kidnapper again. We learn from a manuscript page that the kidnapper's name is actually Mott, and apparently he'd already known who Alan and Alice were back when they were all on the ferry together. He was sent there by his boss to report their arrival in Bright Falls. We also learn that he went to all of Carl Stuckey's cabins looking for them, only to find their empty car sitting next to what used to be Diver's Isle. He had to report this back to his boss. We'll figure out who that boss is soon. But not soon enough, because although Alan literally took on the entire police force and a sentient tractor to get here on time, Mott the camo kidnapper doesn't show. Alan, again a better man than me, waits there from noon until dark until he finally gets a phone call from Mott. Mott tells Alan the plans have changed, and to meet him at Mirror Peak ASAP. Suspiciously, he won't let Alan hear from Alice again, and demands the manuscript better be with him at the meetup or Alice is gone for good. Some very cool environmental storytelling happens as the player moves through the coal mines in Ghost Town. This place was abandoned as a result of the volcano under Cauldron Lake erupting in 1970, that same eruption that sank Thomas Zane's cabin. Workers died, mine caves flooded, so the worksite was shut down. The dead were buried in the cemetery, and the remaining workers who lived there left overnight. The water that flooded the mines is directly from Cauldron Lake, so if you decide to explore one particular tunnel that's been flooded, despite a yellowed painting warning you not to,
without warning, the headache stabbed at my brain. Alice?
Alice!
I'm losing it. I gotta get out of here.
As for the ghost town, it's mostly just taking objects the player has to navigate here since there's not anyone left, including a boss fight with Thomas the Tank Engine. Nothing fancy with this one, it's mainly just a larger than normal taken object that requires focused light to take down. If you haven't noticed yet, repetitive enemies sort of is a weakness of this game. Once we defeat it, we move into a shack where another clip plays of Alan during the week he can't remember. He says he feels like he has to keep writing, that doing anything else is difficult. He found a shoebox inside the cabin belonging to Thomas Zane with his poems in it, the same shoebox we saw in Chapter 1.
He writes of muses and creators summoning fabulous things from a magic lake, using his powers to shape the world of a realm of gods and dreams and demons, dark things that wait for a chance to slip through, wearing the flesh of men as disguise. Zane writes about himself, his girlfriend being taken over by a dark presence, about growing scared of the lake. Zane believes it's a mirror to the gaping void of darkness above, where some Lovecraftian presence lurks. I crawl back upstairs. I'll borrow these things from my story. They ring true. They fit.
Alan is clearly losing it in this footage, smiling and startling himself by touching the camera in his room. Just beneath Mirror Peak, some exploration gives us a very interesting room. In the yellow paint that only shows in the light, we see the name Tom, maniacally written on the walls of the basement. We also see "You Talk to Me" on the TV, "Curse You, Thomas Zane," and a large heart with the initials TZ and CW inside of them. Clearly, this person had an affection for Thomas Zane. Alan notices a boat on the surface of the lake near where Tom's cabin used to be, the one that they'd arrived at on the first day. The massive dark presence appears to be moving toward Mirror Peak at the same time Alan is. It beats him there, and we overhear Mott the kidnapper screaming for mercy.
Sorry, please, wait! The boss didn't know who he was messing with! I didn't know! I swear, I didn't know! We don't have his wife! We don't know where she is! She's probably drowned! We just said we had her to make a play ball, you see? They got him writing for us!
Alan overhears this bombshell and approaches Mott, who is visibly shaken and cowering on the ground. Just then, the image of Barbara Jagger flashes in front of Alan, and Mott is swept up into the air. The sound of Mott's bones crunching and his body being torn can be heard. Alan gets picked up as well, but at the last second lights a flare, so the darkness drops him down into the lake below. From under the surface, Alan sees the boat he'd noticed earlier, and a hand reach down into the water toward him. Here comes Chapter 4, where Remedy decided to totally screw with our heads. Alan awakens again, but this time to Dr. Emil Hartman standing over him. Hartman says he needs to calm down.
You're a patient at my clinic. Have been for a while now. The shock of your wife's death triggered a mental illness.
No, you're lying.
You're suffering from various symptoms of undifferentiated schizophrenia.
Fading back out of consciousness, Alan still doesn't believe him. Come on, don't do this to me. Fully awakening sometime later, we see we're in one of the rooms at Hartman's psychiatric clinic lodge. The door is locked, an IV sits next to the bed, and there's a typewriter placed on the desk in the corner. It doesn't look like Alan's written anything though, as all of the pages on the desk are blank. Dr. Hartman enters the room, and with his orderly as backup. Apparently Alan has been a difficult patient and has resisted most forms of treatment. Under threat of being sedated again, Alan joins Hartman on a tour of the clinic. The only patients left at the lodge today are the ones who Hartman says have more severe cases, while the rest are on a fishing trip with Jack, possibly a reference to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Good movie if you haven't seen it. Dr. Hartman then explains what Alice had told us back in Chapter 1.
I specialize in treating artists.
I bet you do.
Did Alan get admitted here after he fell into the water at Mirror Peak? Did all of the events of the game so far happen in addition to Alan being a patient here? Well, according to Hartman, no. He explains to Alan that Alice died when she fell into the water at Cauldron Lake. Her death by drowning sent Alan into a mental health spiral that has caused him to hallucinate and see his dreams as reality. He refused to accept his wife's death, instead choosing to believe that supernatural forces were keeping her prisoner, and Alan was the only one who could save her.
I know the instinct is to resist me, but think about it. Doesn't this make far more sense than the insane supernatural conspiracy you have concocted in your mind?
Hartman continues to say that so far, no one in Bright Springs has actually died except for Alice. Everything following her drowning has all been Alan's false reality. Carl Stuckey, Barbara Jagger, Mott the Kidnapper, the Bright Falls Police Force, all of it. While you're following him around, you'll notice a few interesting things. First off, every single door you go through with Hartman, he has to unlock first. While that probably makes sense for a psychotherapy clinic, it does give the player a sense of entrapment. We are a prisoner here. We also see a large sundial that was placed in memory of a dear friend and poet with the initials TZ. Is this where Alan got inspiration to include Thomas Zane so heavily in his fantasy? And I'll be honest, it's a sweet view of the lake and a very cool looking cabin. Seriously, my dream vacation would be in a place like this. Minus all the psychiatric clinic stuff, of course. If you peel off from Hartman and go out into this balcony, you'll see a patient who's painting. He says,
"Hello, I've painted you."
And if you look, it's a painting of Alan's face surrounded by what looks like dark water. The patient says that Dr. Hartman has been encouraging him to keep painting Alan, but when he's done with each one, Hartman usually just takes the painting away to his office. We meet some more of the patients. A guy who is an erratic video game developer spouting off references to Max Payne, a lady who is singing to herself on a couch, and two familiar faces, the Anderson brothers.
My rheumatism is killing me.
Hartman reminds us of who these two were. They led a rock band in the 70s and 80s called the Old Gods of Asgard, and adopted the names Thor and Odin to fit the Viking persona. Thor's always got some form of hammer with him, and Odin may or may not have pulled out one of his own eyes to look like Odin from Norse mythology. I honestly don't know why he's called Thor instead of Thor. If you do, let me know in the comments, I'm genuinely curious. An unexpected storm starts to roll in, so Dr. Hartman leaves to go make sure the power supply is ready for it. Before he goes, he encourages Alan to go back to his room and start writing again. The moment he walks out of the door,
I'd like to bash his head in with a hammer.
They say that Dr. Hartman always tries to fish out their secrets by getting them to write more music, but they don't give him the satisfaction. They don't call Alan Alan though, they call him Tom and Zane, obviously mistaking him for Thomas Zane the poet. They keep insisting they were huge rock stars, but Alan's never heard of them. The brothers are clearly too hopped up on Hartman's prescriptions to go into detail.
Put it all down, lest we forget. A crash course. All you need to know to get your head right. You need to find the message.
Odin shows us that he smuggled in a manuscript page in his jacket, probably from their most recent adventure sneaking out of the lodge, and hands it over to Alan. The page describes Thomas Zane being afraid of what he wrote when his poems started to happen in real life, but his assistant, Emil, kept him writing. According to this page, Dr. Hartman was Thomas Zane's assistant. If that's true, he'd have to know about the power of Cauldron Lake. He'd have to know about the power of the manuscript pages, right? But then again, if all this is just a fantasy in Alan's head, what is there to even know?
Something's wrong. I'm not myself. It's hard to think that there's a shadow inside my head. I can only focus on writing. Everything else is a blur. I'm trapped in this cabin, have been for days, but it's always dark outside. My editor is real. I saw her again. She's not human. It's not human. A dark presence is wearing the old woman's face. She was covered in clinging shadows. There's a hole in her chest where her heart should be. I think I've made a horrible mistake. I don't think I'm any closer to saving Alice. It's been lying to me, using me to get the story it wants, and the story will come true.
Still unsure of what to make of all this, but pretty sure Hartman's a lying sack of potatoes, Alan sits at the typewriter and tries to write again. He still can't bring himself to do it, and the sounds of a scuffle erupt downstairs. Upon inspection, we see Tor has knocked out a nurse with an actual hammer, and the large orderly is hiding from the geriatric duo in the staff room. Alan just takes the opportunity to snatch the unconscious nurse's keys. We're gonna go see if Hartman's keeping the rest of the manuscript pages in his office. And thank God we did, because what we find in this hallway is a doozy. To be honest, I missed all of what we're about to see on my first playthrough, and I'm still mad at myself for it. First off, a huge photo on the wall shows all the clinic staff. And who is front and center? Our camo-clad, frat candle-inhaling fake kidnapper himself, Mott. He did have a boss, it turns out, and his boss was Dr. Emil Hartman. Did Hartman put him up to pretending to kidnap Alice? Or did Mott's employment here just serve as inspiration for Alan's mental fantasy? In a side room, we see the paintings from the patient we saw earlier. It depicts the taken enemies we've been running into this whole game, and some trees, a woman, and some wolves. But the biggest bombshell discovery here comes from the tape recorder on the table. One of the tapes is labeled Alice Wake. If you play it, you hear a recorded phone call between Alice and Emil Hartman.
Now, Mrs. Wake, can you tell me about Alan's problems?
He doesn't let me in anymore. He just keeps me in the dark. I'm so alone here, even when he's home. Please help me, Doctor, because I'm at my wit's end.
Well, if you can just get him here, I'll absolutely do my very best.
Yeah, but Doctor, you need to be careful with him. He's not just going to listen to you and cooperate. He's the most stubborn man I've ever met.
If the player doesn't recognize her dialogue here, Alan narrates it for us. The broken up calls he'd heard from Mott the kidnapper where he supposedly put Alice on the phone were actually bits and pieces of this conversation that was recorded.
Hello?
The most stubborn man I've ever met.
Alice? Alice?
Alan. I'm so afraid. He keeps me in the dark. Please help me.
Either Alan's heard this before and it made its way into his fantasy, or Dr. Hartman really did put Mott up to pretending to kidnap Alice. Moving to Hartman's office, we hear a familiar voice yelling out.
Let me out of here! Hartman, do you hear me? I'm gonna sue your crazy quack ass to shreds!
Barry?
Ow! About time!
Barry! Man, am I glad to see you.
He says he came here looking for Alan, but Hartman's orderly had locked him in this room with no way out. Alan opens the doctor's office with the keys, and right on the table is a stack of manuscript pages. Hartman steps into the room and tries to talk Alan not to slip back into his fantasy, but Alan picks up the revolver on the desk and holds him at gunpoint. He tells Barry to find a car, and Hartman to tell the truth, and with that, Hartman finally comes clean. Alan's not crazy. It's all been real up to this point. Good, thank you God for not wasting our time, Remedy. Hartman's got Alan here because he wants to partner with him, be a producer of sorts.
Don't you see? Together we can create something absolutely wonderful.
When Alan had refused to come to the clinic earlier in the game, he staged a kidnapping to try and convince Alan to write more. It's also been the purpose behind running this entire clinic. Hartman has spent decades looking for someone he can use to take advantage of Cauldron Lake's ability to make works of art come true. The dark presence infiltrates the lodge. Is it after Alan? Does it want revenge on Hartman for interfering? Maybe a little bit of both. Alan locks Dr. Hartman in the room with it. He smiles as Hartman's screams go quiet. Physical darkness is manifesting throughout the lodge, blocking off exits and possessing objects. The remaining patients who aren't on the fishing trip are able to leave during the chaos, led by Tor and Odin, who aren't afraid because they've fought the Taken before. Outside, the darkness can be seen completely enveloping the lodge by this point, searching every inch of it for Alan.
Oh, God! Look at the house, Al!
The player has to make their way through taken objects, taken people from previous nights, and a hedge maze that gives off some mad Shining vibes. Around the clinic, the player can find hidden yellow paint that says, "Don't trust Emil," meaning somebody knew Hartman was a dirtbag even back when Thomas Zane was still writing poems. A boss battle ensues where Alan has to fight the large orderly, now taken by the darkness, and a few flocks of taken birds. He's a tough fight since he's got the golden ring that requires boosted lights or flares to bring him down. At this point in the game, we start to have the large assault taken thrown at us more frequently. It definitely makes each encounter more tense on average, and it's becoming more important that the players start rationing ammo, since it's taking more of it to bring enemies down. Flares and flashbangs are even more valuable and necessary from this point onward. After a tense standoff against waves of Taken where we wait for Barry to unlock the gate, we're finally free to leave Hartman's lodge. It's now completely overrun by the Dark Presence. Alan, Barry, and a cutout of Alan in the back seat are driving full speed to get out of there. Barry pleads with Alan for them to leave Bright Falls, but Alan insists they need to go to the Anderson farm to find the brothers' songs. He explains that Cauldron Lake is somehow able to make all works of art come to life. It did it with Thomas Zane's poems in the 70s, the Anderson brothers' songs in the 80s, and now it's doing it with Alan's manuscript. But the catch is that every time, the Dark Presence twists the art in some way to make itself stronger, with its end goal being to be set free from Cauldron Lake, free to kill and consume everyone in Bright Falls, and maybe even beyond that. If Alan can listen to the Anderson songs, he might be able to figure out how to both trap the darkness forever and get Alice back. Thomas Zane didn't have this option back in the 70s because the Dark Presence truly did kill Barbara Jagger when she supposedly drowned, but it hasn't killed Alice yet. The Dark Presence learned its lesson with Tom and Barbara. This time, it's keeping the artist's lover alive as a form of ransom to keep him motivated to write. Not a fan of being trapped for eternity, the Dark Presence throws some rocks at their car, causing it to crash over the side of a cliff. Alan and Barry are separated, but they both start to head the same direction.
Ah! Al! There's something moving down here! Barry, it's a Taken! Use a flare, Barry! Oh, yeah! Barry, are you alright? I'm good, Al! I'm great! Guess you never messed with anyone from New York City before, huh?
At this point, the darkness has taken dozens of people from the woods around Bright Falls. Tonight, we see that all of the remaining staff and farm hands who have continued working at the Anderson farm are now taken. From a distance, we see Walt, the guy who we met in the jail cell before, driving quickly back to his house from the farm. For a visual, here's where he lives, here's the farm. He and the other farm hands, including his friend Danny, work at this farm year-round. The Anderson brothers had a secret moonshine operation going on there too, and Walt went by to grab some bottles for himself. But what he saw there made him turn around and speed back home in tears. When we make it to his house, we find out exactly what he'd seen.
No! Danny, you're not! Please! What are you? No! Don't! I'm sorry!
Going upstairs, we see him lying on the floor, mortally wounded. Danny, his best friend, the man he'd punched and gone to jail for, was now taken by the darkness and did this to him. Walt dies, without ever getting to tell Danny he was sorry for punching him. Dang, that's a tearjerker. Danny the Hoss smashes through a window to finish the job, so we have to finish him. And there's plenty more farmer taken where he came from. There's so many of them, in fact, Alan has no choice but to run from the majority of them. And this is where we get to one of the most memorable sequences of the entire game. So far, Remedy has told us that the Anderson brothers were rock stars. We've heard about it a couple of times, we've read about it in some manuscripts, but so far we haven't seen anything to back that up. Remedy could have been content just doing that, but oh no. They sent us to the Anderson farm, and they're going to show us just what kind of rock stars the old gods of Asgard really were. Approaching a giant stage in the middle of the farm, we see Barry get surrounded by a group of Taken. Just as they're about to deliver the final blow, a bolt of lightning strikes the top of the stage, and the giant fire-breathing dragon stage piece activates, setting the Taken aflame and saving Barry in the last second. The entire stage powers on at this point, complete with stage lights, fireworks, and music straight from the old gods themselves. I unironically think this song that plays is an absolute banger, and it may or may not be in my snowboarding playlist right next to Goofy Goober Rock. So begins a sequence where we are holding off huge swarms of Taken while Barry activates stage lights to help us out, all to the absolute metal soundtrack with lyrics that directly reference fighting the Taken and Barbara Jagger with light. Here's a snippet of it. The whole segment gives off massive Eddie shredding Metallica in the Upside Down vibes. The song, Children of the Elder God, is performed by real-life band Poets of the Fall, a band from Finland who also have one of their own songs, War, featured in the game. A funny Easter egg later on has Pat Main say,
And here's a new song from a band that they always remind me of our local rock legends, the old gods. I couldn't tell you why. I guess it's just, one of those things. Anyway, Here's Poets of the Fall and their latest single, War.
A nod to the fact that even in canon, they sound exactly the same as the old gods of Asgard. The real-life music video for that song, War, even features Ilka Vili, the face model for Alan Wake, fighting off members of Poets of the Fall who have become Taken. Awesome stuff. Anywho, holding off these hordes of Taken farmers is a fun set piece, easily the most high-octane part of the entire game. You've got plenty of weapons to choose from and light gadgets to use, and Barry cuts the action up by reactivating the middle stage light to give you a moment to breathe. The only downside of this segment, in my opinion, is that because you get so actioned out, it's very difficult from this point on to feel fear again when you're in the middle of a combat encounter. I mean, you just wrecked 50 Taken on a rock stage while Barry danced beside you. It's tough to feel that sense of dread that builds up to the next encounter again after this point. However, that's just because of the way I felt, not because the game decides to drop the tense atmosphere after this point, like a lot of horror-esque games do. Thank goodness. If the high action, no suspense Alan Wake is the kind of game you want though, check out the spin-off Alan Wake's American Nightmare. That ought to scratch that itch for you. But from here, the narrative pace is dialed up to 11, so in a way, I think it makes up for the declining scares. The metal gets so out of hand, a nearby shed explodes, opening a path for you to the farmhouse.
That was awesome!
Bright Falls, rock and roll capital of America.
Maneuvering through the barn and farmhouse, we're forced to fight more Taken farmhands and a massive Taken harvester. It's a similar fight to the tractor, but this thing is much bigger and faster, meaning the player has to keep moving and dodging its ram attacks while at the same time looking out for the Taken people entering the stage. Finally entering the Anderson house, we turn on the power and hear the record player stuck downstairs on one line from a song.
Can you hear that, Al? Music?
Uncatching it gives us the following lyrics. Alan and Barry figure out they need to find the Lady of the Light, and there's only one person that can be. Cynthia Weaver, the lamp lady. They decide to wait until morning to leave, and since they have some hours to kill, they do the sensible thing and dig into a couple of bottles of that old Anderson Brothers moonshine. We are then treated to some of the worst sounding drunk talk I've ever heard in voice acting. Don't get me wrong, Matthew Peretta does excellent as Alan Wake in every other aspect of this game, but man, this is rough.
If I just wanted to, I could write 10 books a year, and they'd be the best books that year.
No, you couldn't.
That's right, I couldn't. But I could, because I'm a writer.
What? What do they put in this stuff? I feel like my brain is coming out of my nose.
Little do they know, an ingredient to the moonshine is unfiltered water from Cauldron Lake itself, and after they both slip into a booze snooze, Alan is sent back to Diver's Isle in his mind. The moonshine's giving him an out-of-body experience, and we're about to finally witness what happened the night Alice went missing. After Alan jumped into the black water, he re-emerged on the dock. He couldn't find Alice. While he's in big baby sad mode, Barbara Jagger approaches him.
Look at the cabin. Is there someone in the window?
Alice?
Maybe she didn't drown after all. Maybe she's inside.
Alice!
Yes. She must be here somewhere. Maybe upstairs in the study.
Alice!
Yes, that's where she is. You can apologize.
Alice!
Upon entering the study with Alice nowhere to be seen, Jagger does a 180 and tells Alan,
She's not here. You were foolish to think so. No, she's dead. She drowned.
No, no, no!
It's your fault your wife is dead. You are guilty. All she wanted was to help you right. You killed her.
Ah!
Big baby sad re-engaged. But fret not, she tells Alan.
Cauldron Lake is a special place. Here, you have the power to change things.
If you ever want to see her again, you'll have to write her back, and you're going to have to do as I say if you want it to work properly. Going into a zombified state, Alan agrees and begins to write. For a full week, Alan is trapped here, writing for Jagger the manuscript pages we've been finding all over the place. Jagger has been forcing Alan to turn the story into a horror story, and taken over more and more of where the story goes, with the intention being to free itself, not Alice. This is where Alan decided to make himself the protagonist of the story, and where he discovered Thomas Zane's poems in a shoebox and learned about his previous history with the Dark Presence. Alan knew the inevitable ending would be darkness escaping and consuming everything, so even in his trance, he was able to write an escape for himself. Zane's body died in 1970, but his essence is still alive, now acting as a bright presence, weaker than the Dark Presence, but still there. He arrives at the cabin in his diver's suit.
It isn't here now. I'm here because it was written. I brought the light to set you free.
The sounds of his breathing through the suit is what the player has been hearing whenever they're near those yellow paint and light caches. We already knew that Thomas Zane has been the voice from the light, but now we know he's also responsible for scattering the manuscript pages around Bright Falls for people and Alan to find. His light allows Alan a brief moment of sanity, and Alan uses it to escape. While Zane grabs the manuscript pages, the Dark Presence senses what is happening and returns, only to find Alan already gone. It attacks Zane, weakening him even more than he already was, and leaving behind one unfinished page. Still groggy, Alan drives away, but goes through a guardrail and crashes the car. It was when he woke up from this crash that Alan had lost his memory of the previous week, and our journey as the player began. You might be asking yourself, why doesn't the Dark Presence just make Alan a Taken and force him to write? It forces other people to do its bidding, why not Alan? Well, that's because for the power of writings to come to life to work, it has to be the artist creating the art. Alan was able to be manipulated by the darkness, similar to how Rose was when she lured them to her trailer, but the writings wouldn't do anything if it was just the Dark Presence writing it with Alan's body having zero power. Both Rose and Alan were only affected enough to be sort of zombies in the moment. They could still both recover from this type of effect by the Dark Presence. Alan's mind had to remain intact enough for his own creativity to still be present, and according to his understanding of the way a story works, he couldn't make anything too easy for anyone. He had to include near-death experiences, people dying, and narrow escapes. This is why Alan can't just write, "Then Alan pulls Alice from the water and they go home. Happy ending." Cauldron Lake won't allow a cop-out. When Thomas Zane tried that to bring back Barbara Jagger, it gave him the Dark Presence wearing Barbara instead. The force behind this power is still very much a mystery, and clearly the Dark Presence can't control it, otherwise it would have written itself to victory a long time ago. This power is something the Dark Presence seeks, not something it has. It must use artists to carry out its bidding, not so different from the way Dr. Hartman has tried to manipulate artists at his clinic into creating for him, starting all the way back when he was Thomas Zane's assistant. While Hartman tried it on any artist he could find and hopped them up on prescriptions to get them to be more complacent, the Dark Presence had a better idea of who was more likely to successfully create with their art, explaining its focus on Zane, then the Anderson brothers, and now Alan Wake. While Alan sleeps, Agent Nightingale points the gun at his head, almost pulling the trigger. Alan awakens, saying out loud,
"I wrote it. It's my fault."
That's right, James Joyce. It's your fault, and you're gonna pay for it.
Time-lapsing into the next night, Deerfest has begun. And with such a big influx of people coming to the town to celebrate, you know the Dark Presence is just thinking,
"Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys."
Meanwhile, Alan and Barry are hung over in a jail cell at the sheriff's station.
Oh, I am never drinking again.
Sheriff Breaker and Agent Nightingale, who is holding Alan's manuscript, walks up to the cell, still arguing with each other. The sheriff actually has 2 brain cells to rub together, so she's figured out he's not there on official business. The power goes out, and Wake keels over having a vision of Alice stuck in the dark place. The sheriff enters the cell to check on him, and, as expected, Agent Goob pulls his gun and starts to accuse Alan of faking it.
Get back in the cell, Stephen King! The only way you're leaving this place is over my dead...
Wait a minute.
Oh my god!
So yes, this antagonist just got Supreme Leader Snoked, being ripped out of the story before actually making enough of a difference to it, but oh well, at least the most obnoxious character is out of our hair for now. It's pretty cool to read a couple of the pages he drops behind, one of which is him discovering that the pages tell the future.
He took out his hip flask when he reached the page that described how he reached the page that made him take out his hip flask.
So yeah, Nightingale definitely did read about his own death before this happened. Personally, that's something I'm torn on. I don't know if I'd want to know about how I die before it happens. Now that we're rid of probably the worst character in the game, it gives the sheriff this entire next segment to show us why she is one of the best. Sheriff Breaker turns on the, breaker, and gives us our weapons and flashlight back.
Here are your things. Wake, what do I need to know? What do you need from me?
They can be hurt in the light, only in the light. And I need to find Cynthia Weaver. She can help me stop this.
After an entire game of everyone around Alan telling him he's crazy, she wastes no time. Then again, she did just witness somebody get ripped outside like the opening to Twister, so I don't know, maybe I'm giving her too much credit. The sheriff tells us that Cynthia lives inside the old power plant because, I mean, of course she does, and the quickest way there will be for us to take the rescue chopper from the fire station. Preparing for a fight, Sheriff Breaker tells Barry to stay behind and call the people on a list of phone numbers. Barry's task is to call and tell these people the code word Night Springs so they can be prepared. Apparently it's referencing an inside joke among some of the town's higher-ups that the TV show Night Springs was inspired by the weird stuff that happens at Bright Falls. While the idea that certain people of the town are aware of all the supernatural stuff going on and just keep it from the public is pretty cool, but this doesn't actually go anywhere and doesn't really serve for much more than a world-building moment. We don't see any effect of these phone calls later. In this game anyway. He doesn't know it yet, but he's helping tip off the Bureau from control. Stepping directly into Silent Hill, I mean seriously, look at this side by side. Alan and Sheriff Breaker have to fight their way through newly taken townspeople and tourists. It's an all-out assault now, with the Dark Presence pulling no punches in what it throws at us. Every type of taken we've seen so far, in addition to new ones, in a sort of hilarious visual, the Deerfest float that's popped up a few times shreds down the street as a taken object and tries to run you over. I really had my fingers crossed for a boss fight with this thing, but alas, one dodge will have to do. Missed opportunity if you ask me. The town is another huge play area that rewards you for exploring it, just about every time you decide not to go the way you're supposed to go. It's like Remedy's proud of the area they've built and want players to have an incentive for checking out every corner of it, and that is a great developer-player transaction in my opinion. If you decide to go back into the Oh Dear Diner, you'll find a page in the back hallway where you'd first encounter the Dark Presence. The page gives you a heads up, the Taken are attacking Barry back at the sheriff's station. Don't worry though, there's plenty of things jumping out of the shadows at you for the entirety of this chapter. During your trip through town, you come across Barry absolutely hauling it towards you from down the street.
Oh god! Oh god!
The Dark Presence is hot on his tail, hurling vehicles around him and trapping him inside the general store. He's fine though, and for some reason he sounds excited about what he sees in there, and we'll get to see what that's all about later. Also hilariously, Dr. Nelson yells at you from his apartment window to keep the noise down.
Keep the hell down or I'll call the sheriff!
Oh, hi, Doc. I've got it. Don't worry about it.
Sarah, about time somebody showed up. All this shooting in the air is idiotic. One of these days they'll kill somebody. And over Deerfest.
I know. Go back to bed.
In the bookstore, the shopkeeper has definitely taken advantage of Alan Wake's presence in Bright Falls, as they've got a fire sale going on all of his Alex Casey books. Nice touch. Just like we've seen in the woods, it appears someone has parked trucks around town with spotlights and supplies in the truck beds, so Alan makes use of them during a standoff with the Taken crowd, while Sarah works to get the door unlocked. Once inside, the two have to make their way through the basement, where multiple of the big boy assault Taken pop out from the dark.
Did you call 911?
It's Barry, fully decked out in Christmas lights with a headlamp on his forehead.
What are the Christmas lights for?
Protection, man! Like garlic against vampires?
The trio finally make it to the fire station and work on starting up the rescue chopper. The darkness is now literally throwing everything it possibly can at Alan Wake. Vehicles, debris, crows, Taken. It still needs Alan to finish the story, but that very story that's been written so far keeps letting it get frustratingly close to getting him, only for him to slip away again. Contrary to the theory that Alan is never in danger in this game, Alan is still very much in danger. The darkness helped him write the pages that he did, so it knows what was written pretty well. Well enough to exploit every loophole it can, like who it sends after him, how hard it makes his journey, and how much pain and punishment he endures. There's a popular theory out there that also says if it successfully captured Alan, it could still get him to write that he fails in the end. At that point, the Dark Presence would allow any of the story that hadn't happened yet to play out uninterrupted, and just wait for its victory. Not to mention Alice is still stuck and isolated in the dark place, and the Dark Presence could still end her life at any moment since no rescue has been written for her yet. Narrowly escaping, on the fly over to the power plant, Sheriff Breaker lets Alan know her and her dad are actually low-key fans of his books. In the middle of their character bonding, a flock of taken birds fly at the chopper and interrupt the flight, forcing Alan to hop out and trek through the transformer yard on foot. Crossing the bridge, Alan is able to link back up with the rescue chopper, where Sheriff Breaker provides support with the searchlight. I really like that this game takes a sort of unoriginal gameplay idea, like you fighting on the ground while a helicopter covers you, but with its own twist, that the chopper isn't shooting anything. In this story, its light is the best kind of support you could want in this situation, at least until the taken birds chase it off again. Alan walks up to the Bright Falls power plant doors and immediately recognizes the logo. It's the same logo that has appeared in yellow paint on the light caches, and on the sides of the trucks full of lights and ammunition that have been spread around the town and woods. Looks like we finally get to meet the person who's been keeping our ammo pouches full and has single-handedly provided all of Energizer's company income for the last 40 years.
Hold it right there! Miss Weaver, Cynthia, I'm a friend.
Prove it!
You knew Zane, Thomas Zane. You're the Lady of the Light in the song. You can help me.
About time. Young man, I've been waiting a very long time for you.
For the last 4 decades, she's been protecting something we need, and it's located in what she calls the well-lit room. It is here that we are finally able to piece together the full backstory of Bright Falls and Cauldron Lake. Well, the backstory from 1970 onwards at least. Tom, a world-famous poet and avid diver, liked to write and dive at Diver's Isle. Cynthia Weaver, in her 20s at the time, was in love with him, but he took to Barbara Jagger instead. Barbara was Tom's muse, inspiring him to write all sorts of poems that started to alter the very reality around them. Not fully realizing the source of the power or the danger that lurked within Cauldron Lake, Barbara was taken and killed by the dark presence while swimming. Tom, unaware that writing new reality at Cauldron Lake had its own rules, tried to write Barbara back. He wrote without a balance, a definitively happy ending, so the dark presence abused a loophole in the writing to bring Barbara back, but only her face. It now wore her corpse like a suit and pretended to be Barbara Jagger. Acting as Tom's muse and disguised as his love, the dark presence persuaded Tom to write more and more in its favor. Tom eventually caught on that something was wrong, so he tied her to a chair and attempted to cut out her heart. What he found instead was pure darkness where her heart should have been. He knew he couldn't just write the dark presence out of existence, and creating reality required balance, sacrifices. Tom wrote himself out of the world, including his fame as a poet anywhere outside of Bright Falls. He wrote that he could only leave behind something if it remained in his shoebox in the cabin. He wrote a role for Cynthia Weaver, possibly manipulating her because he knew of her feelings toward him as the Lady of the Light. It would be her task to protect one item in particular and the town by providing as many light sources as possible and placing caches of supplies strategically around Bright Falls. Only those who have been touched by the darkness can see the paint. She would have to do this until the writer arrived. He also wrote some more about events to come, we'll see exactly what later. Tom grabbed the dark presence that was wearing Barbara's face and dove straight to the bottom of Cauldron Lake in his suit to take on the darkness face to face. Thomas Zane sacrificed himself, trapped the dark presence, and caused the eruption under the lake in 1970. This encounter is what led him instead to become the bright presence, or perhaps just the face for the bright presence like Barbara is for the dark presence. This temporarily weakened the dark presence, trapping it beneath Cauldron Lake, until the Anderson brothers began writing music the next decade. The brothers accidentally helped give the dark presence enough power to be able to navigate around Bright Falls, inspiring the local scary stories about Barbara Jagger, the Scratching Hag. Probably to pad out the runtime a bit, Cynthia sends Alan on an errand to shut down a part of the plant that's drawing too much power from the main one, and she won't do it herself because she's been following the rules to the letter. We see these rules in yellow paint outside. Number 1, never go out at night, and number 2, keep the lights on. Also during this little journey, I got jump scared into oblivion by this guy. Once we return, Cynthia proves yet again she's thought of every conceivable way to stay out of the dark. We could go outside and walk to the well-lit room that's underneath the nearby dam, but instead she's lined an entire underground pipe with lights so the journey can be made at night. Approximately 0.02 seconds after going into this pipe with her,
Okay, I'll tell Sarah.
It's Sarah now?
Whoa! No! For the sweet love of...
Barry! Barry!
Alan refuses to leave without his friends, so he abandons the pipe and says he'll take the route above ground to meet Cynthia at the dam.
Well, be a fool. I'll use the pipe. I'll meet you at the dam if you make it.
Alan rendezvous with Barry and Sheriff Breaker at the downed chopper, all three of them fighting off Taken on their way to the dam. They take an elevator to the top, and after a brief separation, the Dark Presence itself arrives and again starts hurling things at Alan, hell-bent on taking him here and now.
Enough. You will go no further. Stop now.
The darkness knows this is its last chance to get him before he has the most effective weapon against it in his possession. With Cynthia's help, Alan gets away, and the group of 4 make it downstairs. Turns out the well-lit room is an abandoned army base, and according to Cynthia, there's not a single shadow in the entire room.
Take it, and I won't need to worry about the room anymore, because 6 and 33 and 118 need changing soon, and I don't want to climb up the ladder to change them because it's very late, and I'm tired. And if you take it, I won't have to do that anymore.
This is where we get weird. Well, even weirder than we've already gotten. Alan opens Thomas Zane's shoebox in the center of the room, which is odd because his shoebox was totally in the cabin with us in the beginning, and inside of it he finds the clicker from his childhood? You know, the clicker he'd given Alice years ago during the blackout in their apartment. Weird that it's here. But even weirder, we find pages written by Thomas Zane. In them, Tom writes about Alan's childhood, how Alan was afraid of the dark and his mother gave him the clicker, and how he would find it now, in the present, and will apparently take it with him to jump into Cauldron Lake. Tom wrote about Alan before Alan was even born. Tom prepared a weapon to use against the Dark Presence, and he wrote about its origin in Alan's childhood. How much more of Alan's life did Thomas Zane bring to life through his writings? The page says the clicker was given to Alan's mother by his father. Is this implying that Tom is Alan's father? Now wait a minute, these pages are written autobiographically. Is Alan Wake also Thomas Zane somehow? No time to linger too long on that now. With the clicker, we have an evil entity to trap and a wife to save.
I can get to her now. I can finish this.
I don't dare play more of that to avoid copyright strikes, but Poets of the Fall were an excellent choice to bring in for this game, and I am psyched to hear they're returning for Alan Wake 2. Our final chapter of Alan Wake's main story begins with a flashback. We're back in the Wake's New York apartment. Alan, oh god, here we go, wakes up again after a long night of partying with the Bear. After putting on some shades to help with the light and downing some invisible painkillers, Alan reviews his talk show interview by watching a recording of it on the TiVo. Ah, the days of having to record stuff on TV while it was live if you wanted to watch it on demand later. Anywho, the interview is a bit thematic, as it clues us in that Alan, as a writer, is not above killing off his main character if he thinks it's for the benefit of the overall story.
But this last book is all about the death of the main character, the hard-boiled New York detective, Alex Casey. Now, there's been a lot of outrage about this. Why the hell did you kill Casey? What the hell were you thinking, man?
Where are you going with this, Remedy? I don't like where this is headed. And he gets called out for apparently having a famous temper that led to a fight with some paparazzi. I mean, that checks out. With an instantly memeable image, we get a little more of the tension between Barry and Alice. She doesn't much like Barry taking Alan around to the nightlife scene, and Barry thinks Alice is holding Alan back from letting his career really take off. Because apparently you had to sit in a dark room of a nightclub with music blasting, unable to hear the person next to you while you watch divorced moms flirt with college guys on the dance floor to make it as a writer in 2010. Anywho, the two make up, and Alan promises to take her on a vacation once the book tour is over. It's a nice moment, until you remember he said this 2 full years before they actually went on that vacation. We're back in the present day. The page written by Tom said Alan takes the clicker to the lake, so Alan insists he's going to do this, and he's going to go alone. Because Sheriff Breaker's a real one and wouldn't have taken no for an answer, Alan has to pull a gun on her and make her give up hers to Barry so that she won't try to come with him. Barry gives Alan a tearful goodbye. No ending has been written to this story yet, and now that Alan has the clicker, the Dark Presence wants him dead, not captured, so all bets are off on what it will throw at him. Alan clicks the clicker, but doesn't see any immediate effect. Until he goes outside anyway. It's now daytime, seemingly instantaneously. Better to not ask questions and just take advantage of the light. We drive along the still gorgeous view of the Pacific Northwest until we come to a tunnel. Of course, the inside is dark and some stopped cars block our way, so Alan goes on foot. In the middle of the tunnel, a vision of the Dark Presence holding Alice invades his mind and he hears its voice.
I will kill your wife.
Just like it had immediately turned to day, it was now nighttime again. Now it's a race against the clock to get back to Cauldron Lake before the Dark Presence does. Maybe the clicker makes it temporarily light outside? Well, in that case, why not just keep spamming it until you get to the lake? Don't ask questions, we have a finale to watch. An unnecessary but still appreciated addition is when you pass by the Majestic Motel. If you get out and go inside, you can find the room Agent Nightingale was staying in. His jacket's there, along with photos of various characters from around town. It doesn't add much narratively, but it's still another neat way Remedy makes the world feel believable. If you thought the Dark Presence was pissed during the fight downtown, it's going all out now. It begins pulling different items that have been swallowed by Cauldron Lake over time and just chunking them through the air. A boat here, a train there. Cauldron Lake is like its own little Bermuda Triangle. It's not really clear if these are things that have just incidentally sunk in the lake or if they were all victims of the Dark Presence. But my money's on the darkness has probably been abducting people and things for a long time, since that's all it's really had the power to do for decades. Most of this chapter is just the journey to Cauldron Lake, including passing over a bridge, a boss fight with machinery, and an admittedly tense encounter with multiple chainsaw-wielding Taken. All the while, the Dark Presence has made its presence known and follows Alan on its trip, leaving a path of destruction everywhere it goes. Finally, at the edge of Cauldron Lake, we reach the climax of this story. The Dark Presence is now a whirlwind of power and fury, throwing more debris at Alan as he makes his way closer. The player has to dodge obstacles and fight off flocks of birds, all the while attempting to pop off some well-placed flares at the target. The Dark Presence itself is in the center of the whirlwind, still wearing the face of Barbara Jagger. After enough flares, the Dark Presence retreats, and Alan is able to fulfill Tom's written page. Clicker in hand, he jumps into the darkness of Cauldron Lake. Help! If you feel like there haven't been enough scenes of Alan waking up, here's another one. He wakes up in his New York apartment yet again, next to Alice even, but this time it's not a flashback. Something's wrong. Darkness itself creeps along the windows, and Alice shows no signs of being disturbed that the lights are out.
It wasn't a dream. Everything's fine. Turn the lights on. Turn the lights on!
The power's out. There's no light. Come back to bed and I'll make you forget all about your fear of the dark.
Yes. Yes. Yeah!
Thankfully, Alan didn't spontaneously become a moron, so he goes to look for the clicker. Well, he realizes that he's in the dark place now, and he can will things to be created here. Gameplay-wise, that means you shine your flashlight on a written word until the object forms, and you hear the sound of a keyboard clacking as that word is written into reality. He picks up the clicker and the illusion of the apartment fades away. Thomas Zane in his diver's suit appears once more and tells Alan he must make his way to the cabin to where the Dark Presence is and fill its heart with light. We're now going to see what has been the cause of a ton of speculation about where the sequel's going to go. A perfect doppelganger of Alan has appeared, smiling with a suspicious-looking grin. Tom tells us not to worry.
Don't mind him, he's Mr. Scratch. Your friends will meet him when you're gone.
And Mr. Scratch disappears, still smiling. Alan moves forward, willing different objects to become reality. It's unclear if this is all an illusion while he's actually just writing, or if he's already written this and it's just now playing out. But either way, we hear the keyboard keys typing as we go. The Dark Presence can't physically stop him, it seems, so it switches to mental tactics.
I'm leaving you.
What?
I'm leaving you, Alan. I met someone. I'm in love with someone else.
Alan insists this conversation never happened, but presses forward to the cabin. Approaching the door, we hear the sounds of Thomas Zane cutting out Barbara Jagger's heart. Only this time, Thomas Zane's voice sounds like Alan's.
To be good. Please, untie me, you naughty boy. I will help you write your masterpiece. I will love you forever.
No, you're not Barbara Jagger. I made a terrible mistake. I should have never written you back. You came back wrong. Your heart is filled with darkness.
Put that knife away, Thomas. Put it down.
Heart's filled with darkness. Cut it out. I'll take you back to the depths of paper.
and Alice screaming at the dark presence to let her go.
Get away from me, you hag! Where am I? Let me go!
Alice! Alice! I'm coming!
Your husband refused to do as he was told. All he had to do was write what I wanted him to write. Now it's too late. It's his fault. You'll stay here forever.
Alan enters the cabin, and we finally come face to face with the dark presence. Its voice is deep, and the hole where Barbara Jagger's heart should be is on full display.
Now you will never get her back.
In true Lovecraftian entity fashion, it tells Alan it's much older than he is.
Older than your first work of art. I will find a new face to wear. Someone else to dream me free.
Alan shoves the clicker inside the opening in its chest and presses the button. With the entity now seemingly defeated, Alan is still trapped in the dark place, but he can feel Alice's presence nearby. He sits at the typewriter and begins writing the end to departure. Alan has learned from the mistakes of Thomas Zane. He knows sacrifices must be made in order to bring light back into the story. We see a clock moving backward and a time lapse of a day-night cycle. Alice Wake comes to underneath the surface of the lake and swims to the shore. Scared and alone, it's unclear if she remembers being trapped in the dark place. She screams out for Alan, but receives no reply. The festivities of Deerfest are in full swing. Different townspeople are celebrating in the streets with some confetti that's probably not biodegradable. Rose clutches a lamp, seemingly taking up the mantle of the Lady of the Light, and behind her we see Agent Nightingale staring out from the darkness. Is the dark presence wearing his face now? Either very focused or just catatonic, Alan Wake remains in the dark place, still writing.
It's not a lake. It's an ocean.
And the credits roll. What on earth did we just witness? The ambiguity of Alan Wake's story and ending has given us 13 years of speculation. Cruise around online and you can find all sorts of rabbit holes of debates and theories. What did Alan mean, it's an ocean? It's clearly a reference to Thomas Zane's poem in the dream sequence in Chapter 1. Maybe he means the dark presence is more powerful than we thought. Or maybe he's seeing through Cauldron Lake, to the place the dark presence came from, and there's more on the other side. Maybe it's referring to this game just being the start of the Remedyverse, where, in their games, weird and supernatural events happen all over the world, and the dark presence at Bright Falls is just one of many. There's even more topics that remain for healthy debate, like, was the clock winding backwards just metaphorical, or did Alan really roll back time to the day Alice went missing? Did Thomas Zane only write the clicker into Alan's life, or did he write Alan Wake into existence? Did Alan ever actually leave the dark place after that first week, or did he stay there, still writing, while we, the player, played as Mr. Scratch, following the rules of the story in Alan's place? If Mr. Scratch is an entity that originates from darkness, why did Thomas Zane sound so chill about sending him out into the world?
Don't mind him, he's Mr. Scratch. Your friends will meet him when you're gone.
Does Tom, or the bright presence that looks like Tom, have nefarious motives? The conversation Alan heard where he turned off the lights on Alice and Alice loved another man. Was this a trick from the dark presence? Or were we actually overhearing Alice talking to Mr. Scratch, who was pretending to be Alan Wake? A few things most people agree on. The events of the game really did happen, as evidenced by Rose and Nightingale's fates. Alan really is stuck in the dark place, and the dark presence is not dead, just temporarily subdued. We have no idea what happened to everybody else. Do they even remember the events of the game? There's more to the story of Alan Wake in the form of 2 DLC chapters, the spin-off game Alan Wake's American Nightmare, and a crossover in a DLC episode of Remedy's game Control. To summarize, Alan's still stuck in the dark place and trying to write his way back out. Mr. Scratch, Alan's doppelganger, is the product of the rumors and speculation of Alan Wake being a madman and a serial killer. And those rumors came to life through the power of Cauldron Lake in the form of Mr. Scratch. He's been released out into the world to wreak havoc and torment Alice Wake. Here's a photo she took of him around 2017. And apparently Dr. Hartman didn't die when Alan locked him in the room with the dark presence. He jumped into the lake in search of its power and came back as well, this. This might be a hot take among Remedy fans, but to be honest, I prefer the story of Alan Wake as an isolated franchise. I think a lot of the added lore and control kind of takes away a little too much of the mystery. I mean, the game Alan Wake said it best in its opening when it quoted Stephen King.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear.
With Alan Wake 2 on the way, it'll probably put to rest some of that ambiguity, or just make it worse, I guess we'll see. But even if it does disappoint, we still have the first one to go back to, which in my opinion holds up just fine on its own.